Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our 15th workshop in the PhD seminar series in business management, in our theme of navigating the PhD terrain. And today I'll be talking about original contribution in research, right? How do you make an original contribution in research? And we are going to spend possibly around 45 minutes to 1 hour trying to go through this idea of making original contribution. And it's a continuation of the workshop 14 that we held when we were looking at constructing or developing arguments. Now, of course, original contribution in research is somehow linked and tied together to argumentation, ladies and gentlemen. So I will not really take you through the various aspects that we covered last time, but today I just want you to know that we shall have an opportunity to look at diagrams and how we can use diagrams in making original contributions. Ladies and gentlemen. So having said that, the number of reference books that you need to really look out for and try to read and familiarize yourself with them. One of them is Arnold Wenzel, 2018, A Guide to Argumentative Research Writing and Thinking and Overcoming Challenges, Routledge Publications. You have to again read Wenzel, 2017, Creative Research in Economics, ladies and gentlemen. And you can also read Alverson and Sandberg, 2011, Generating Research Questions. And there's so many other books written by Chaniak, 1984, Computational Complexity. And then you have Kuhn, which I've been giving you. And Kuhn talks about the function of dogma in scientific research. And of course, you have also the structure of scientific revolution, and then you can also read Meadow, 1979, Advice on Young Scientists, ladies and gentlemen. So the books are too many, and we may not have all the time to articulate the books that you need to read, right? But do not forget that the subject or the topic we are handling today is very simple: original contribution in research. How can we make those original contributions, ladies and gentlemen? And I'll just introduce that idea to you, and then later on, go on and start discussing the perspectives. And in form of introduction, I just want to say that one of the defining features of a PhD thesis, ladies and gentlemen, or probably a manuscript or an article that you are writing for a journal, is that it seeks to make an original contribution to a field of study. So if you are in the area of auditing, you want to make an original contribution to auditing. If you are in the area of finance, you want to make an original contribution to finance. Possibly, what has interested you is the discipline of herding behaviors in finance, and you want to make an original contribution to herding behavior. Right, and if you're talking about the stock markets and so forth, ladies and gentlemen. So, as you can see here, it is strange that most research courses which are taught at the university to the undergraduates, bachelor's, master's, and PhD students prefer to teach the details of executing research designs as opposed to how to find the original contribution that inspires the actual research. So the issue of original contribution is always missed out, and they go ahead and articulate the research process. So you are teaching somebody to do research, but research on something that he does not know, and the fellow is unable to make an argument, a credible argument, and is unable to advance that argument, right? And at the end of the day, the fellow is unable to make an original contribution in that field of study, ladies and gentlemen. So this workshop, ladies and gentlemen, challenges this formula that a person's original contribution is the most important factor and should therefore be a central topic in research courses. So what should be done in most of the research courses is to teach individuals or researchers how to make original contribution rather than focusing and spending too much time taking individuals throughout the entire research process. I'm not saying that it is bad to do so. It is okay, and you can continue doing that. But the first step should be really teaching an individual to make original contribution, because a person's original contribution is the most important factor and should be a central topic that is addressed by the research methods classes, ladies and gentlemen. And to make an original contribution, you need two things. One, you need a reason to be original, right? If you don't have a reason to be original, then you can always go on and even copy and reproduce and repackage the ideas of other people without really coming up with anything that is new. And of course, the second one is that something, you need something to be original about, right? So one is the reason, and then two is the something. And that is really a thesis or an argument, as you can see. And finding a reason for originality is the easier and obvious starting point in research. And for me, it is best captured in the idea or perspective of calling. You can put that in quotes. It is best captured in calling, which is described as the place where your passion and the world's needs come together. So as a researcher, a young researcher, you've got passion, right? But you also have the world and the reality out there. So that calling, what I call a calling, right, in my case here, is defined as the place where your passion as a researcher or PhD student and the world's needs come together and meet, right? And of course, this can be described as the reason for being, ladies and gentlemen. So, let's look at the first part, finding a reason to be original, right? Where do we get the reasons for being original? And I want to say that one of the most primary rules of research, ladies and gentlemen, right, is that you must only write about things that you care about, right? And that's the reason, really. You must write about the things that you care about. And most people usually think that they will find this passion in a topic. But I want to say this is a mistake, right? Because topics don't excite, ladies and gentlemen. Topics don't excite. It is easier to care and write about that which stimulates you. So start by looking for a problem or a concern that stirs your emotions. A problem, right, or a concern that makes you angry. A problem or a concern that makes you curious, right, or sparks your interest, ladies and gentlemen. And problems are more likely to do this than topics. So don't start with topics. Start with the problem. Go out there, describe the reality, right? As long as it sparks, right, your interest, right? As long as it makes you angry, as long as it stirs your emotions, then you are there. And of course, in this case, problems are more likely to do this great job, as I've already said, than concentrating on topics. So do not really concentrate on topics and then say, I have a topic here, I have a topic there, and then you take it to your supervisor and say, please approve my topic, not at the PhD level, ladies and gentlemen. If that's what you've been doing, and if you have started doing it, there's something wrong with you, and therefore you must rethink, go back, rethink, and start with the problem out there, start with the reality out there, and get something that stirs your emotions, something that annoys you, right? Something that sparks your curiosity, your interest, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, this is very important, ladies and gentlemen. And you must be able to start from that perspective. And that's why in the previous workshop, I called this an argument, right? You are able to find a concept or idea around which a thesis can be developed, right? So start with the problems. And of course, as you can see, in addition to being somewhat unyielding, topics are quite often very broad, right? So it is incredibly difficult to see what research they call for, right? In most cases, these topics don't make sense because the topics are a collection of concepts, right? And the concepts are abstract in nature, and you don't have any description of what is happening in reality. So by contrast, problems are more specific, and in this case require actions like research to solve them. And problems are also, as you can see, naturally occurring, right? Naturally, these problems lead to questions, right? That seek for answers and must be answered. And of course, unanswered questions, like unresolved riddles in this case, will get other people interested. And that means many people will be drawn on board to join the discussion or probably the argument or the debate that you are trying to advance. Now, since, ladies and gentlemen, all research is about finding answers to questions, identifying a problem in this case makes it easier to find questions to which the world needs answers. The world is out there and they have so many questions and they want answers. So they have unanswered questions, and that's why you are supposed to start from there and find those particular questions so that you craft answers to meet those questions in form of research, ladies and gentlemen. It is therefore in problems that you are likely to find something that you care about and that the world also needs answers. And finally, you will be able to write about something which you are passionate about. You'll be able to write about something, you'll be able to write about something that which excites you. You are able to write about something that which your zeal is bound to be infectious at the end of the day. Now this means that you will be able to get others to care as well and join the debate and thereby make a difference in the world by trying to provide answers to those particular questions, ladies and gentlemen. So, as you can see, many people think research is an emotional exercise. Many people think that research is made up of emotions when in the actual sense, or in fact, people do their best research when it arouses strong emotions inside them. When you find that which you are passionate about within, you have found that particular reason for your research, and this is what will get you through in difficult times. And that much your time when you do not have energy and of course effort to sit extra hours in the night, deep in the night, then it is the emotions that will keep you going because you have picked something you are passionate about, and you must provide solutions and, of course, answers to the questions that have been raised over time. So you can find such problems by asking yourself the following questions. And I'm going to show you here and give you a guidelines on the screen here that you must actually follow in order to try and answer those particular questions, or come up with the questions that you are going to recite about. So you can find questions, right, by asking the following questions to yourself, right? And one of the questions is, are there any problems within your discipline that have always interested you, right? Are there issues that make you angry, right, or energize you, right? Which issues did you find most interesting in the lectures that you attended? Which issues do you find yourself talking about often, and which ones do you love reading about? So even though having a reason is what makes you do research or makes a research contribution worthwhile, it is not enough by itself, ladies and gentlemen, and you need to know that very well. So you need to do a number of things. You need to give your problem or concerns more substance and structure so that your research about it becomes becomes actually publishable material in this case. You need to find something to say about the problem. You need to find something that is truly original, that will be said by you, and which is really easier if you have found an area that is ripe for an original contribution, and by actually coming up with credible arguments that you can easily advance. So, as you can see, those are the things we are going to discuss in this workshop, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll be able to find answers to some of the most daunting problems to novice researchers in this case. Now, I want to ask a question that probably you are also asking wherever you are. What does it take to come up with what we call original contribution? What does it mean to be original in social sciences research, ladies and gentlemen? And that's something that you must be able to learn. Now, sometimes it's easy to feel that the experts in the field have made most of the contributions worth making in a discipline. And that's what you will probably be feeling, or that's what you are feeling. And you say, they have made all the contributions. There's nothing that I can make. There's no contribution I can make in this area. Because you know that the experts have been doing their work well. And of course, they have done so. But certainly still gaps to exist. So that would be correct if there was nothing more to originality than finding something new. Right. So whereas these points are presented here on the screen, and we know that it is easier to feel that the experts have done their work, right, and that they have made most of the contributions, right, which are worth making a particular discipline. Let me also say this, that there is much more to contribute than actually what you think. So, originality is so much more than that, ladies and gentlemen. If you know what you are looking for and how to find it, right, then you realize that with each, right, new article and thesis has said and what remains to be said, you realize that there's a lot that needs to be done. When you read these journal articles with a critical mind, a critical heart, a thoughtful mind and heart, you'll be able to understand and come up with a contribution to knowledge, original contribution. So the naive view of originality holds that we simply discover new ideas and add them to the literature. And that's the naive idea. And what this implies that the current literature is essentially correct and merely incomplete. That's the kind of thinking you might be having. A lot has been done, right, and therefore I need to add something, add something, add something. Now that's what I call in our literature review, if you recall, workshop, I call it progressive coherence, right. In other words, there's been cumulative knowledge growth, right, and therefore every scholar agrees with every other person in that particular area. So you take only one perspective, all right. But that's not what happens in most cases. Literature is sometimes contradictory, and therefore you need to provide some bit of clarity, right. There are also unanswered questions, and maybe some of the things that we have said in the literature will work in one setting, but may not work in the second setting, ladies and gentlemen, or another setting. Social reality, ladies and gentlemen, does not exist independently from humans. For example, like fossils waiting to be discovered, because humans create this very reality and thus are proactively involved and don't simply discover or stumble across a pre-existing truth. So human beings are part of the process, are part of the reality. They create this very reality, and they are always involved in that reality. And of course, they don't simply discover or stumble across a pre-existing truth, ladies and gentlemen. Now, because humans change faster than the research about social reality, there will always be areas where our understanding is no longer adequate, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, there will be that situation, that state, ladies and gentlemen, right, where the existing literature is insufficient, where the existing literature which seems to offer an explanation is insufficient, and this will provide further opportunities for undertaking research. And of course, to complicate the matters in this case, social science researchers not only describe, right, this reality, but through their work participate in that reality, right? They question and then often transform that reality, ladies and gentlemen. So as a result, research always plays catch up to the existing reality, and thus new contributions are always needed. And collectively, as you can see, in this growing understanding of the discipline, ladies and gentlemen, researchers don't merely discover new contributions, but they create them. They create contributions through the arguments which are presented in research. However, this reality does not simply change by the actions of a single researcher. Social reality is shaped collectively. So you're talking about a group of scholars, right, adding something new. So it exists independently from any single researcher's actions. For research to have an impact, it has to be accepted by other researchers and hopefully also by non-researchers. There is a lot of persuasion that is needed, right? There's a lot of persuasion needed when making an original contribution. A researcher can't simply present facts, right, and end there, but also has to make a contribution possible by appealing to the discipline's values, methods, and shared understanding of reality. A researcher, for example, may come across an opportunity for contribution, but its originality will only be recognized if the researcher can convince other researchers in the discipline, ladies and gentlemen, that it is relevant to the discipline and that it challenges the discipline's prior understanding or prior knowledge. So therefore, the issue of developing a credible argument becomes very important here. So argumentation enters here in that you will need to first convince others that you have noticed an opportunity for a new research, or a new contribution. Second, make the case that this contribution promises to alter or supplement current understanding and therefore offers progression in knowledge, ladies and gentlemen. And as you can see, I'm going to give you a typology, right, that you can use to come up with original contribution, right? Meaning that you get this from research. As you can see from the screen here, I've given you a table, right? Of course, that table has 4 boxes, right? Now, of course, as you can see, right, we have the X and Y. On the Y-axis, we have what we call not relevant. The Y-axis, not relevant. Of course, from 0 up to the uppermost point there, or maximum, we are talking about obvious things. We are talking about relevance of your research. Remember, we are talking about making original contribution, but we are trying to construct a typology of new contributions that is inspired by Davis 1971, right? As seen from this diagram here. On the x-axis, not relevant to relevant, as you can see. On the x-axis, you've got not significant and significant. Now, of course, as you can see, when you begin combining these, you get a contribution that is irrelevant, a contribution that is absurd, as you can see on the screen, a contribution that is obvious, and a contribution that is interesting, ladies and gentlemen. So as you can see from this figure, ladies and gentlemen, from this typology that you still see on the screen, only one of the 4 kinds of contributions, right, presented in the boxes, relevant, absurd, obvious, interesting, etc., only one of those 4 kinds of new contributions is truly original. And that is what is labeled as interesting, ladies and gentlemen. Interesting. Now, a contribution to be relevant, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see on the board there, right, it should be clear to other researchers that it has value to the discipline. But it's also possible for contributions to be useful without significantly changing our understanding, ladies and gentlemen. As you can see on the screen still, and this happens when a contribution fills a gap. An example of this is when one simply extends a previous study to another country or applies an existing method to more recent data. Just imagine that somebody studied the concept of career identity in Uganda, right, and you do not know what's likely to pertain in another country, maybe in the Asian countries. So you go to an Asian country and you take the same probably kind of concept and you test it, and probably you can also use different methods, or you can even test that particular concept using current data, ladies and gentlemen. Now, such studies, ladies and gentlemen, are insignificant and fall into the category of obvious, as you can see on the quadrant here. Obvious, right? It falls under that category that we call obvious, right? Obvious quadrant. Now, contributions that are not useful will be labeled or seen as irrelevant, as you can see, and in some cases absurd, as I've indicated on the screen here. And an absurd one is one that has no value because it goes too far in terms of radically subverting the understanding of the discipline, ladies and gentlemen. And that actually might be strange, and what I'm saying might be strange, but a new contribution, ladies and gentlemen, a new contribution that raises many questions, ladies and gentlemen, challenges the most basic assumption of a discipline, and is one that pushes the limits too far so that the fundamental tenets of the disciplines are questioned. And of course, we have a number of examples here, and I'll be giving you more examples. An example of this would be a study in biology. It would be a study in biology that challenges evolution or denies the role of DNA, right? So that means you'll be going too far in challenging the fundamental tenets of the discipline. And people will not even believe that what you are saying is correct because everybody talks about a DNA, right? So for a contribution to be significant, ladies and gentlemen, it has to disrupt something in a discipline's understanding, but be careful not to push the boundaries so much that it brings into question the veracity of the entire discipline. Now, this disruption is essential because, as already explained, research is always chasing reality. Research is always chasing that reality without some disruption or without disrupting our understanding, our thinking, our perspectives would be a little bit stagnant, ladies and gentlemen. So we need to challenge these things, but it should not be disruption for its own sake, right? It has to be one that brings about a useful change in our understanding. It has to be one that brings about, yes, a useful change, as I've already said, but it should not be utterly disconnected from what we know. And of course, I'll give you the writings of one of the scholars called Carl Weck in 1989, page 524. He made certain observations. And he summarized it when he wrote, the contribution, let me just show it on the screen here so that you follow me. The contribution of social science, or social sciences, ladies and gentlemen, does not lie in validated knowledge, but rather in the suggestion of relationships and connections that had not previously been suspected, relationships that change actions and perspectives. And that's what he says. Again, the science novelist Peter Madawa, 1979, page 94, also makes this observation when he says, that if research does not hold out the possibility of causing one to revise one's views, it is hard to see why it should be done at all. Now, in light of these revelations, ladies and gentlemen, researchers in search of an original contribution, therefore, have to strike a balance between relevance and significance. So, significance is very important, and relevance very important too. And therefore, you must strike a balance between relevance and significance. Now, those who do that will find themselves with interesting contributions. And that's why in a letter, Einstein wrote to his friend Solovini, Holton, 1979, he explained something similar. So, we find this in the works that's written by Holton, 1979, but Einstein certainly wrote to his friend Solovini. And the issue here was about striking a balance between relevance and significance. In other words, your contribution, right, must be significant, right, but must also be relevant to a particular discipline. So I'm going to show you a diagram here, and I'm sure you see that diagram, right? And that diagram is taken from the works of Einstein. So we present Einstein's diagram, right, in this figure here that we have called figure 2. I'm sure you are seeing Einstein's diagram, ladies and gentlemen. So Einstein's diagram is quite interesting because we have this line that you see here, right, and that's the shared understanding. That's the one that is represented by E, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, as you move on, right, from this, as you look at this diagram again, right, you see E, and then I'll ask you to look at J, right, E from down here, this baseline, you have J, then you have A, that node there, the apex, and then of course you have the SSS, those are the nodes with those broken arrows facing below there, as you can see. Now from this diagram that you can see on this on the screen or this board, ladies and gentlemen, it shows an original contribution, right? This diagram shows that an original contribution has to start with a good grasp of a discipline's understanding, right? So that's why you have shared understanding. You start with a good grasp of a discipline's understanding. Then you gradually break away from it, and that's why you move from E, you go to J, you go to A. So you gradually break away from that. And this is attained by, one, challenging an assumption, right? If you want to gradually break away from the shared understanding, challenge the existing assumptions, right? Raise new questions that people have never thought about. Reformulate an old problem, and then suggest an idea that answers a question or solves a problem, ladies and gentlemen. So that is important. However, you need to note that this contribution will not be seen as original until it is connected to the previous understanding. And that's why in this diagram that I have just shown you here, I hope you know that this is a diagram that is derived from the works of Einstein, right? Of course, Einstein did come up with very many interesting ideas, and this is Einstein, right? So Einstein talks about a contribution that can be made by challenging assumptions, raising new questions, reformulating the old problem, and of course suggesting answers to a question, or probably if you can solve a particular problem. So you start with that base, as you can see there, ladies and gentlemen. So that is what we call EJA, shared understanding. Then you go to J, breakaway contribution, as you can see on the screen here, and then you go to A up there. So I've told you how that can be attained. So however, that contribution will not be seen as original until it is connected to the previous understanding, and that is A, S, E. So A is up there. You can see S, right? That's why you have the derived statements, right? So it's derived statements, AS, right, and of course E. That's why it is. So it can be related to ASE, and then for you, you break away from that contribution, ladies and gentlemen. So this can be achieved by developing the idea, using the methods of the discipline, and then writing up the ideas. And one makes a contribution relevant by linking it to the shared understanding of the discipline as contained in the existing literature, ladies and gentlemen. And this requires argumentation. And of course, this is a process that we shall go through later on. Now, the more a contribution breaks away from the existing literature, as you can see that arrow, right, that dark arrow, where the base is ASE, and that's a breakaway contribution, right, which requires that argumentation, which we shall be discussing later, right? We're saying the more contribution breaks away from the existing literature, the more significant it is. And more significance, ladies and gentlemen, requires more argumentative effort when making it relevant. So therefore, you must develop your skills, abilities to argue. I know that novice researchers at the undergraduate level, or possibly even at the master's level, should take care not to deviate too much from the body of existing literature. Because initially, by the way, as you can see, it might be, or it may be more prudent not to break away too much and rather make contributions that are probably closer to being obvious, so that they are not attacked, right? But later on, when you go to the PhD level, the situation changes, and therefore you must really work from there. So as you can see, ladies and gentlemen, experienced researchers, right, then move away from that kind of thinking, from that kind of mindset, right? At the doctoral level, they go beyond that, right? And they go beyond, right? And they aim at breaking away more so that they make their contribution interesting and relevant, ladies and gentlemen. So in our next section, I will be able to present a model to you that will help you find more obvious contributions, right? And later in the discussions, I'll also present techniques, ladies and gentlemen, that you can use to understand these things. So, as you can see, there is a fast way to find some original contributions. And as you can see, one way to make original contribution is to search for and find places where previous research is inadequate. I did give you this information in your literature review, if you recall. And in general, we find 4 kinds of inadequacies, right? And I just want to show them on the screen here. One is new. So here, when we talk about new, we are talking about something that has never been researched theoretically or empirically before. And of course, this is rare in social sciences, and such opportunities are usually not around for very long. The second one is what you call a gap. Something that has been researched before, but there are some areas that has been neglected. And that's what we call a gap. Now, this is the most common and easiest approach, and this is what Sandberg and Alverson have called Garb Spotting. And often this involves extending previous research or existing methods to neglected areas, such as other regions, different groups, different parts of the world. You use also different time periods, etc., etc. And many papers and theses will point out such gaps when they discuss areas for further research or for future research. The third way or method is conflict. Research, and when we talk about conflict here, we are talking about research about something that contains, you need to research about something that contains competing explanations or inconsistencies. That's what we call conflict. Yeah. So you research about something that contains those competing explanations. And if there are different schools of thoughts in your discipline, these are easy to find, ladies and gentlemen. The fourth approach is what we call wrong. And here, parts of the research, or probably the theoretical research or empirical research, may be incorrect or make wrong assumptions, ladies and gentlemen. And researchers with opposing views will often point out such others' mistakes or other people's mistakes or faults, ladies and gentlemen. So you can find this from the journal articles or the literature that you read. Now, in any real-world problems, we may find 5 major areas where a research contribution is possible, and I want to give them to you. Still, I'll show them here before I show you a matrix that we can actually try to use. But let me just show you a matrix and then go into those areas. So this is a matrix here, and we call it a matrix of contribution possibilities, right, as you can see. And this matrix is going to remain here for quite some time so that you understand what I'm talking about, because you have got theory there in the matrix, as you can see. Again, in the rows, you've got theory, you've got application, you've got method, you've got prediction, and you've got generalization. Now, under the contribution, you can talk about a contribution that is new, a contribution that can be referred to as gaps. I've already gone through this, by the way: new, gap, conflict, and wrong. Right. So, but we can combine what we call real world. We can combine these 5 areas where a research contribution is possible. Right. In theory, you can be able to contribute something. Application, you can contribute something. Method, you can contribute something, etc. So let's start with theory. As you can see, theory, as you can see from the diagram here, we know that a theory is a generalized explanation of things we can observe in the real world, and is not specific to a specific time or place, ladies and gentlemen. So you have generalized explanation. As we saw earlier on, in our previous workshops and discussions, we said a theory is that net that you cast out there in the entire world to capture that reality. So theory generally is a generalized explanation of things we can observe in the real world, and it is not specific to a time and a place. So it could be that there is no theory to explain something, or that some theory has not been tested before, and therefore you can have a contribution theory in regards to that perspective. 2, often things that are confounding and for which there are no known explanations call for a creation of a new theory. You'll have confounding factors, and there are no known explanations to those confounding factors, and therefore you start thinking about contributing to a particular theory or creation of a theory that can explain those compounding things. And of course, again, the application of, not application, but the theory still. An example in this is what we call the germ theory, which in the 1800s solved the puzzle of the transmission of disease. The second one is application, as you can see. So still, as you can see on the screen here, application. Application is the use of a theory in practice. And it could be that a particular theory has not been applied to certain places. A particular theory has not been used to explain observations. A particular theory has a new application that has not been investigated before. So in that perspective, or in that regard, there will be a contribution in as far as application is concerned. The third area where a contribution can be made is in terms of method. And as you can see, a method is a technique by which results are generated. And of course, in this case, one may develop a new method, right? One may adapt or improve old methods, ladies and gentlemen. One may apply methods to theories or data in ways not done before. So in such a perspective of thinking, you are actually contributing knowledge, but from a methodological standpoint. Ladies and gentlemen, let me go to the fourth aspect, which is actually prediction. As you can see on the diagram here, prediction is when you make an informed guess based on the theory or data about something that is not known. Again, when you talk about prediction here, it could be, in this case, a forecast or position of the existence of a known phenomenon. And the classic example here is that of Mendeleev, who predicted the existence of new chemical elements based on the periodic table. I hope you remember the periodic table in chemistry, and this is something that has been taught over the years, and this is basic knowledge in the area of chemistry. So Mendeleev did a very great job in this example, and this is a classic example of prediction. A classic example of this relates to Mendeleev's prediction of the existence of new chemical elements based on the periodic table. And that's how we managed to come up with a periodic table. In fact, if you dismiss the arguments of the periodic table, then you are going to dismiss more or less the entire discipline of chemistry at the end of the day. So that's where we are now, that you can make a contribution in terms of prediction, but although that is possible in the social sciences, and I've given you an example, this can also be done in the area of social sciences, ladies and gentlemen. And as you can see, the last bit from this table that I've given you, which is a matrix of contribution possibilities, then we have generalization. Generalization is when you extend a theory or finding to a wider range of groups or phenomena that which was originally intended, than that which was originally intended, sorry. So I'm saying here that generalization is when you extend a theory or a finding to a wider range of groups, phenomenon, than that which was originally intended, ladies and gentlemen. So, for example, if I could use this, geographically speaking, ladies and gentlemen, it might be that findings made in one South American country could be generalized to all countries of the continent. But it's also possible, ladies and gentlemen, that yes, this finding was major, it can be generalized, but nobody ever tested this. And therefore, a theory about families can be generalized to other parts of the entire economy, but nobody has attempted to examine this, ladies and gentlemen. So, now as you can see, right, if you recall where we started, we looked at inadequacies. Inadequacies in terms of new, in terms of gap, in terms of conflict, and in terms of wrong. Still look at this diagram on the screen. And then I've also talked about areas for contribution, in terms of theory, application, method, and then prediction and generalizability, ladies and gentlemen. Now, you see, when you combine the kinds of inadequacies in the research with the possible area of contribution, we get the 4 by 5 matrix of 20 kinds of research contributions shown in this table, ladies and gentlemen. So that is what we see there, right? And this is, as you can see, this is an imperfect matrix. with much overlap between the cells, but it does give you a sense of how much room there is to contribute to the research area, ladies and gentlemen. So, again, let me just explain some of these things here. You can see in the matrix those areas where we put AG, PM, MC. Right, it's a combination of those two words in terms of contribution and in terms of course, new knowledge or knowledge. So, when we say PN, that means we are talking about prediction, right? But new prediction. AG, the application, and we are talking about a gap in terms of application. And then MC is method, and conflict, and TW is wrong, and so forth. So, as you can see, some contribution may fit into one cell, but it's quite common for studies to combine contributions from more than one, as you can see in this table. So, if we call AG, right, AG here actually refers to application gap, right? And here we ask ourselves the questions, are there any theories in your discipline that have not yet been applied to certain phenomena? Are there theories from other disciplines that could be applied to your discipline? Right, so that is application gap, AG. The method conflict gap, right, the method conflict is MC, as you can see, and of course, there you begin asking yourself a number of questions. Can any of the methods in your discipline, ladies and gentlemen, be improved to help settle a disagreement amongst researchers? And that is quite important for us to consider because you want to really settle a disagreement. Are there any new methods available that could do the same thing, ladies and gentlemen? So those are the issues. The third one, what we call the theory wrong, TW, right? And of course, there you are asking yourself the following questions. Are there any theories in your discipline that are wrong or are becoming wrong due to changes in social reality? And this is possible, right? If racism, for instance, disappears in America, for instance, some of the theories that were developed on racism will become obsolete, right, useless. And therefore, the social setting will change and you must come up with a new theory. For those people who developed the theory of apartheid in South Africa, the situation now is archaic, right? That situation has since changed. Therefore, you must come up with a new theory. For those who developed the theory of slave trade during that time, when the slaves were being exported to the US and the UK, certainly from Africa, right, and to go and work on those farms, right, and plantations and so forth. Now, you have to come up with a new theory because the kind of slavery that you have today is totally different from the one that used to be experienced around the era of slave trade, ladies and gentlemen. So that's why now you are talking about issues of theory wrong, yes, because you are talking about, you are asking yourself a question, are there any theories in your discipline, right, that are wrong or are becoming wrong due to changes in social reality, and what are they and where do they go wrong, ladies and gentlemen? So you actually read and critique those theories and dismiss them, but you must be very careful when you are dismissing those theories because these are theories that took considerable period of time before they were developed, so they were tested. Now, of course, we have other one that you can call PN, theory new. So here you ask yourself, are there any theories or models in your discipline or in others that could make prediction about certain phenomena that are better or have not been made before? So you ask yourself that question. Prediction, new. So you have theories. You have new models in your discipline and possibly other disciplines that you can borrow these models, right? But they can make predictions about these phenomena a little bit better, right? So you can actually now get those theories and use them in your work. So Alverson in this case and Sandberg 2011 shows that the vast majority of research tends to focus on filling gaps, ladies and gentlemen, and that the research And of course, the result of this, ladies and gentlemen, is that this contributes less and less with each day, with each study or passage of time. The gaps increase in number, but decrease the size and significance, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, the number of publications, certainly, ladies and gentlemen, grows exponentially, but they become boring and predictable to the extent that we become people who know more and more about less and less we know everything about nothing. So when you follow that element of the gap, it means that you will become an individual who know more and more about less, and of course you end up knowing very little of knowing a lot about nothing, ladies and gentlemen. So in contrast, ladies and gentlemen, the technique that follow in this case that I'll be giving you in the next few minutes will get you to delve more deeply into the problems and questions of your discipline and become aware of your assumptions, ladies and gentlemen. So in this case, the objective is to continue working on your mindsets, right? We are going to come up with new techniques, and these techniques have been developed by different scholars and scattered in literature, and Wenzel has really pioneered in this area, right? But these techniques aim at developing the mindset of openness, right? As a researcher, you must have an open mind, and you must be aware of preconceptions, right, that one finds in true experts, ladies and gentlemen. So as you can see, the really interesting original contribution can only be made with this mindset. A mindset of openness, a mindset of awareness of preconceptions, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, this will help, this will enable you realize the challenges that you face when you are constructing knowledge. So, let me now take you to another aspect as we move towards the end, right? And I'll give you two examples, and I'll use two models, right, that I'll call conflict diagrams to try and bring out these perspectives, bring out the element of contribution. Now, I want to talk about originality through the intellectual problems of the discipline, right? So how do we then get to this level of originality? By examining the intellectual problems of the discipline, ladies and gentlemen. I know as you are seated here, listening in, you might be having a number of questions, right? You might be having a number of questions in your mind, and these are questions that are not answered. So I might say, let me say at this particular moment that without problems, ladies and gentlemen, there would be no way of knowing whether science is making progress. I know that there are people who have dismissed the idea of problems, but problems are all around us. They are all over the place. Right now you've got the COVID-19, the coronavirus pandemic, and it's a problem, and it's a challenge. You cannot say that you are going to research on issues that do not relate to COVID-19. And right now the funding is going into COVID-19, and this is a challenge and this is a problem. So problems are all over the place, and without problems there will be no way of knowing whether science is making progress or headway. Therefore, creative scientists are motivated by the need to solve unsolved problems, ladies and gentlemen, and this drives research as we move from old problems to new problems. Right. I hope you still remember the Spanish flu. Right. Moving on. Right up to the, of course, the problem that we had about 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Right. That acute respiratory syndrome and so forth, and now we are moving on to COVID-19, and we are told that a terrible one is yet to come. So therefore they are always motivated by this, and science tries to find solutions. Right now, they are trying to find a vaccine for the current pandemic, ladies and gentlemen. So, as you can see, without unsolved problems, science would become sterile, since unsolved problems motivate scientists to generate and pursue innovative ideas. So the kinds of problems that innovative ideas are interested in are problems with our ideas. So such problems are not mere puzzles, right? As Thomas Kuhn, I'm sure you have read his book, The Structure of Scientific Revolution, echoes. He actually calls these problems that keep our understanding unchanged, right? And of course, he says such problems are what can be referred to as intellectual problems, ladies and gentlemen. So intellectual problems are very important, right? And these must be examined in detail, ladies and gentlemen. So that's what we are talking about, and intellectual problems cannot simply be solved by gathering more data or filling more gaps, right? As most people are doing, they patch up the ends here and there, right? And when you look at the research, it's patched up things from A, B, C, and D, right? A cocktail of issues, right? No argument. Original contribution is zero, right? And of course, these can't be solved simply by gathering more data and data and data and data. And then at the end of the day, you take more time to demonstrate that you understand statistical analysis, right? You articulate every corner, etc., without demonstrating to us how the results that you have obtained actually do solve a problem. And that's what we are interested in, rather than spending much time talking about. Of course, validating your instrument is very important, and you need to do that very well, and you need to use bias-free estimations, and your research is supposed to be bias-free. Actually, bias-free is a very difficult thing to achieve, but minimal biases, right? That's why you cater about common methods bias plus a number of other biases, right? But all the same, at the end of the day, after you've gone through that, and you shouldn't really overdo it. If you can prove to the audience that you did it, that's enough, and that takes simple time. Now move on and demonstrate to us how your results solves the problems that we are experiencing or currently experiencing right now. Of course, if you talk about a vaccine for COVID-19, you can talk about the protocols that have been followed and whether those protocols were followed properly and nicely and so forth. Once you do that, then you must articulate to us how that particular drug is going to react or behave in our bodies and what is likely to happen at the end of the day. And that is very important, that material time. So intellectual problems, ladies and gentlemen, don't appear out of nowhere. They are the results of countless arguments that accumulated and connected to other arguments in the regulated chaos. I'm sure you have read the chaos theory and you understand what it is. And all these characterize the development of scientific knowledge, ladies and gentlemen. So arguments, as you can see, get patched together over time to deal with a changing reality and to respond to new arguments that arise. Now, every argument is based on assumptions. Don't forget that. And therefore, we can challenge the assumptions. And when it becomes part of the conversation, it smuggles in those assumptions. And this is where the trouble starts, ladies and gentlemen. And most of those assumptions are inconsistent with each other. And because researchers are not aware of all the assumptions, it takes time for the inconsistencies to become clear. So if you want to make original contribution, one of the areas you should really start working on is challenging the assumption. There is no simple research, there isn't any single research that is not based on assumptions. It's not there. There are always assumptions, right? You assume A, B, C, and D. Even when they are developing drugs and vaccines, there are certain assumptions that are made, and then tests are carried out, and then reactions are observed over time, etc., right? And then, of course, after some time, the the germ in your body, right, may become resistant to the drugs. Again, more tests are carried out, and then, of course, decisions are taken. So most of the assumptions that we make in research are inconsistent with each other, and because researchers are usually not aware of all the assumptions, it takes time for the inconsistencies to become clear. So you can start by attacking these assumptions and even articulating a number of assumptions, and then you probably go on and come up with a contribution. Now, to become clear, ladies and gentlemen, only when these assumptions manifest as intellectual problems, ladies and gentlemen, and then it takes the researchers with keen interest, ladies and gentlemen, as I've already mentioned, to see the assumptions and make the kinds of interesting contributions that improves our understanding, ladies and gentlemen. So assumptions are key issues that we need to examine. Now, there is a more detailed discussion of this element of assumptions in Wesel 2017, but suffice to say, ladies and gentlemen, that we now realize the inconsistencies that we find in research in form of assumptions are inevitable development of knowledge, and they will never disappear, ladies and gentlemen. So you can always attack these assumptions. Now, of course, this is a good thing for us. It is good news for you as PhD students, as researchers, ladies and gentlemen, because it means a continuous flow of opportunities for originality, right? It means that if we know how to capture these inconsistencies very well, then we can make a contribution that will be considered a contribution by the disciplinary audience, ladies and gentlemen. And that's what we need to do as students, as PhD researchers, and as continuing researchers. Remember, as a PhD, you are being mentored to undertake independent research in this growing understanding of the various disciplines where you intend to contribute knowledge, ladies and gentlemen. So, the secret lies in representing problems as logical conflicts. So these problems that you have must be presented as logical conflicts, and this is because we know from the study of classical logic, right, that if there is even one small inconsistency in a knowledge system, ladies and gentlemen, then it is possible to prove anything, even when things are false or the exact opposite, ladies and gentlemen. So if a discipline produces wrong theories or opposing views, like all disciplines do, it is usually a sign of some undetected inconsistencies in its assumptions, and that's why we need to examine these assumptions. So representing problems as logical conflicts, besides offering a more fruitful perspective on problems, has the added advantage of making it easier to see the assumptions that give rise to the problems. And that's why we are really concerned with this. So just being able to represent a problem differently can sometimes be an original contribution, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why we should actually start from that perspective. In fact, some of the greatest breakthrough in science came from reformulating the old problem. And this is because new formulations change the theory employed, they change the question asked, they change the assumptions made, they change the kind of answers that are considered, plus a number of other things, ladies and gentlemen. So, as we move to the end, ladies and gentlemen, right, I want us to see a figure here that I call figure 3, right? That's what we are going to use as an illustration for you to understand intellectual problems as logical conflicts, right? I want you to understand intellectual problems as logical conflicts, and that's where we shall end. I will show you figure 3, later on show you figure 4, and we shall take up from there in our next lecture, in our next workshop, ladies and gentlemen. We shall take up from there in our next workshop, ladies and gentlemen. So, before I show you how you create a logical conflict for a problem, let me first help you to read it. Now you can see this diagram, or what we call figure 3, right, which shows an example of a simplified problem in economics with respect to wages, right. Now you can see here, right, this problem, right, and this is a simplified problem in economics. Now this particular representation is taken from the works of Godrat, 1994. So this diagram is there in Godrat 1994, and that's where it is taken, except that the direction of the arrows is reversed. So the direction of the arrows have been reversed to suggest a logic of deliberate intention by the people involved in the problem. Right, so that's where we are. Now from this figure, as you can see on the screen, we can see two opposing views that end up in action A and action tilde A. So we've got A and then you've got tilde A. A is an action. Tilde A is another action that is in conflict with A. So A is A, tilde A is not A. It's a counter argument of A, as we saw earlier on in the arguments. So the tilde signifies not, N-O-T, as you can see on the screen here, right? The tilde signifies not A. It means not A or the opposite of A. So as you can see from this diagram here, a simple example that I've already articulated, right? Both sides, as you can see where you have the tilde A and A, right, do, however, have a common goal that we have called G, right? And that goal is to enhance the welfare of the country. So if your study is in the area of welfare economics, your objective is to enhance the welfare of a country, and that is G, and that's the goal. Enhance national welfare. I'm helping you to read this diagram, right? Now you can start from this way and move the other side. You want to identify a new contribution, right, by presenting a logical conflict, right, an intellectual problem, right? So both sides do, however, have a common goal, as you can see, enhance the welfare of the country. Now to achieve this common goal of enhancing the welfare of a country, we must meet two different needs or requirements that have been presented as R and tilde R. So in other words, R are those things that you can do, right, and tilde R, those are the counter arguments of R. So of course, as you can see in this case, in this diagram, on the one hand, it is postulated that if we want to enhance the welfare, which is our major goal G, right, we must increase the average income level of the country's citizens, and that is R. So increase the average income level of the country's citizens, then you will achieve welfare of all your people in the country. Now gives us the arrow, this gives us the arrow labeled 1, which you can see G, right, leads to R. That is the I. Look at the diagram here. That is 1, right, which connect our common goal to one requirement. So G goes to R, leads to R. Now on the other hand, if we want to enhance welfare, we must increase the employment of the country's citizens. So that is what we call the R dash, right? Now, of course, remember it's not R, because that would be tilde R, right? But we have R dash, right? So if you want to achieve that goal, please do that, right? Make sure that you increase employment, right? Follow the argument as I take you through. Now this gives us arrow 3, Roman numeral 3, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm sure you can see that on the screen here, which connects our common goal to the other requirements. So you have G, right, leading to R dash. Earlier on, we had G leading to R, right? Now R, that is R dash, is increased employment. R was increased average income. So for you to achieve welfare of the citizens, increase average income, and also increase employment. These are two possibilities, as you can see. We want to develop a conflict gap, which will form a contribution to knowledge, ladies and gentlemen. Do not forget that. And that's exactly what we are doing, ladies and gentlemen. So the conflict arises, right, because it is argued that to increase people's income, right, as you can see there, we must pay them higher wages, right? That's what you have as A there. As you can see, increase wages so that you have increased average income, right? But to increase employment, as you can see down this way, you want to increase employment, we need to reduce wages, right? Because if you increase wages, you'll not be able to employ so many people. But if you increase the wages, because the resource envelope of the company or companies is limited, right, then you will end up employing fewer people at the end of the day. So most of the people will be unemployed at the end of the day. So to achieve welfare of citizens, having a very big population unemployed is problematic, ladies and gentlemen. So that's why we say at this material time, the conflict arises because it is argued to increase people's income, we must pay the higher wages, but to increase the employment again, we must reduce the wages, as you can see there. So, to achieve the first requirement, R, we need to take one action that we call A, increase wages, and the two are connected by arrow 2, right? That is R leading to A. Now, to achieve the second requirement, R dash, we need to take an action not A, right? And not A, which is read as tilde A, right? That conflicts with the first action, and the two are connected by arrow, right? Arrow 4 that you can see there. R dash leading to tilde A, ladies and gentlemen. So I'm helping you to read this. Now the argument to increase wages, which is A, is in conflict with that of decreasing wages, tilde A, and this is shown by the kinked arrow labeled V, labeled 5, as you can see there. Right, that's the kinked arrow. So that's a contradiction that seems to exist. But since reasoning based on the current understanding of the discipline leads us to two opposite actions, it means that there is some inconsistency in the assumptions on which this reasoning is based, ladies and gentlemen. Knowledge is derived from assumptions, and thus the collection of all the assumptions is a discipline, right? And it forms its shared knowledge in this perspective. If there is an inconsistency, we have an intellectual problem that brings the existing knowledge into doubt, because it should not happen that our knowledge leads us to a contradiction. So to find the causes of the inconsistencies, ladies and gentlemen, the sources of ideas for original contribution, right, we need to locate the assumptions and bring them to the surface, because these two certainly rests on two major assumptions, as you can see. Now, if you find yourself disagreeing with one side of the logical conflict, as I've shown here on the screen, right, you have probably already noticed some of the assumptions. So looking at the figure again, as you can see on the board there, on the screen, right, you can try to figure out in your case whether there are certain places where you disagree with this diagram, right, or at least where the reasoning comes into question. So can you pinpoint at this? And I think the answer is yes. Now this is what makes this way of representing problems so useful, and it makes the reasoning underlying the problems visible. Now if you disagreed, you probably pointed at one of the arrows and it is exactly here where you find the assumptions. So the assumptions are usually found in the arrows, ladies and gentlemen. So every arrow is an argument, right? Every arrow is an argument, and it is based on numerous assumptions. For example, in arrow 4, as you have already seen on the board, and as you already see on the board, right, arrow 4, we assume a number of things. One assumption is that companies will only employ more people if they can pay them less. That's an assumption. And under arrow 2, as you can see, there are also other assumptions that we make, right? Under arrow 2, the other assumption is that when companies pay their workers more, they will still employ the same number of workers than before. And that's an assumption. And that may not be tenable, by the way, because the resource envelope of companies is limited. So through this diagram, not only do we become aware of each side's assumptions, but the cause of the conflict also becomes apparent. And therefore, in short, one assumption is that companies pay attention to the wage and therefore employ more people when the wage falls, while the other maintains that they don't care about the wages and employ the same number of people even when the wages rises. Therefore, right, there is an obvious inconsistency in this case. Now, taking arrow 3, right, Roman numeral 3, as you can see as an example, the simplest way to define the assumptions under each arrow is to ask ourselves, what do we assume when we argue that to enhance national welfare, we must increase employment? And of course, we need to do this with the rest of the arrows when we try to critique. And of course, when we do that, you will probably find it easier to find the assumptions underlying the arrows you disagree with. Now, if you struggle, right, take an arrow and ask yourself, is it always true? And if not, why not? Right? You can also probe further, asking, is it true? And if it's true, under what conditions? Is it true for all the time? Is it true for all the time? Is it true in all places? When is it true, ladies and gentlemen? For example, the questioning could lead you to realize that a company does not always employ people when wages fall because it assumes at least 3 things. One, that the new workers, right, will be as productive as the current ones. There is a need for the company's products, and that the company is sufficiently profitable, plus a number of other things, right? Now, of course, when we do all this, we can find a number of conflicts as we articulated in our contribution, significance, importance gap, ladies and gentlemen. So I think, allow me now to leave that, and then I take you to another figure. And this is the last figure, right? Again, this is a simplified version of the previous figure. This is figure 4, right? Figure 3, if you compare figure 3 and figure 4, they are more or less the same, by the way. The only difference is that the perspectives or the arguments we are advancing are a little bit connected, right? Whereas the other one had certain things which are specific, this one now gives you general ideas and perspectives that you can use. So with this example in mind, it will not be, with this example and with this diagram that you have here, ladies and gentlemen, it will now be easier to understand the conflict diagram in this generic form as we have advanced here in this diagram or figure form, right? So I'm giving you now the generic, the other one was a specific example that's taken from economics, ladies and gentlemen. So let's try to understand this as we close, right? So you can see I showed this generic form because I want to point out some common mistakes that people make when constructing their own conflict diagrams. In fact, the interpretations can vary depending on where you are starting from. The earlier diagram that you saw, 3, we started with a common goal. And then we moved on up to where the conflict was arising from. Right, at this material time, the situation can change, especially if we start from the A and A plus, or A dash, or A tilde, or tilde A. Right, so we read this diagram from left to right as follows. Right, and that's what I've already taken you through. To achieve G, right, which is our common goal, we must have R, right? And of course, you know what our R was, and to achieve R, we must do A. This is what this means. To achieve G, we must have R, and to achieve R, we must do A. Now, since we have two right paths, as you can see, there are two paths here, the upper path and the lower path. The lower path tells you to achieve G, we must have R dash, and to achieve R, we must do tilde A, right? And that's the counter argument. So we find that A is in conflict with tilde A, and that's what it is. So the common goal G has to be a goal that both sides want to achieve, right? So it usually has to be very broad in order to capture the needs of both sides. Now, some people make this goal too specific, but it is totally acceptable if expressed in vague terms, such as welfare, right, such as happiness. Although we are talking about vague terms here, right, but these are constructs that have been developed and tested over time, and there's no really serious vagueness in them, right? So welfare, happiness, success, or profitability, those are the concepts. But we are saying they are constructs because they have a number of concepts in them, and therefore they are slightly broader, as you can see. So, and of course the thesis here, right, is around this thing called G, right, and that's what you are going to study. So, some people I know may try to make this a little bit specific. So, but many people mix up the requirements and the actions. A conflict diagram is constructed with a system. As you can see, a system can be in terms of community, and if you look at this diagram here, you've got a need, right? First of all, a common goal. That's a goal that needs to be achieved by either a country or a particular community, right? So, a conflict diagram is constructed with a system, and a system can be a community, can be government, can be a firm, right? So that will be at the back of your mind as you construct a conflict diagram. And the requirement boxes, the R and the R dash, have to be expressed as a need of this system or group. So what are the needs of the community, the need of a country, and so forth? To meet these needs, specific actions or decisions have to be taken by some group in the real world. And therefore, these are found in the last boxes of A and A dash, right? And it's not always necessary that A and A tilde or tilde A be polar opposites, but it is critical that they are perceived by the discipline or disciplinary audience as being in conflict or at least inconsistent, ladies and gentlemen. And another common mistake here is that people feel they have to be unbiased and agree with both sides of their conflict diagram, and that is not possible. This is neither necessary nor desirable in research in this perspective. You will most likely find yourself disagreeing with one side, and that is fine. At this point, you are simply trying to set up a conflict, and I'm sure you are still seeing a conflict diagram here where you have the system, right, so that you can derive the assumptions and questions that will lead to an original contribution. And when you come up with this kind of diagram, then you can start looking at the assumptions presented by the arrows there, right, as certainly portrayed by literature. And then you start questioning these things, and then you have a number of gaps there. And then these gaps that you will come up with can form the conceptualization of your paper or your research. So if you put down only what you agree with, you might never find a conflict, ladies and gentlemen, and by extension, you will never formulate an argument that will lead to original contribution, ladies and gentlemen. So, as you can see here, in our diagram, I've already told you that you have the common goal this way, need of the system group, right? And then from there we go to actions or decisions, right? That is now Roman numeral 1, Roman numeral 2, Roman numeral 3, and Roman numeral 4, ladies and gentlemen, as you can see on the diagram here. So, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very much as I close. I want to thank you for coming and attending this workshop 15. I must say that in workshop 15, we've been looking at issues of original contribution, right? And this is what we are going to continue advancing in our next workshop when we look at original contribution and conflict diagram. But just to take you a little bit back for you to understand, ladies and gentlemen, what we have so far covered, because you need to be kept, you must be briefed on what we have covered. Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you that in this section, in this workshop, we have looked at original contribution research, specifically looking at finding a reason to be original, right, and what it means to be original in social science research. And I've given you a fast way to find some original contributions. Then we have also looked at originality through intellectual problems of the discipline and understanding intellectual problems as logical conflicts, and then constructing a conflict diagram from actions or decisions. And we shall start from there in our next workshop. Stay well, stay safe, have a nice day. I want to take this opportunity again to welcome you to our 16th workshop. Stay well and enjoy your day. Bye.